And now we'd like to introduce Dr. Charles Allen Brown from Purdue University, Language and Cultural Exchange in the USA, and the chapter, Impediments to Fostering Interculturalism at Home, the Nation State, Social Power, and Cultural Representation in EFL Teaching Materials. Thank you, Doctor, for your 2 minutes remarks.
Okay, well, thank you. And hello, everyone. It's a privilege to have an opportunity to join the session today. And I'd like to especially thank Dr. Fraser and Dr. Vista for putting together these sessions. It's a lot of work, and I think everyone recognizes that. About my research and the chapter in the volume, my area of research focus is English education in East Asia. And my work that I'm talking about today is an outgrowth of that focus. One issue of great concern is inequity in access to English education, and that English education in places like East Asia is becoming a mechanism for the reproduction of social inequality. More affluent students are privy to more supplemental forms of English education. And in fact, there's an entire industry that has grown up around this. One aspect of this is that lower resource English learners have less mobility. And several of the speakers this morning have alluded to or spoken about this particular issue. Now, this mobility question is important because those with more resources can study abroad in English-speaking locales for such activities as summer programs or high school or college university experiences. Those with lower resources have less of these opportunities, less chance to engage in these activities, and therefore they must rely more heavily or even exclusively on the classroom for their language learning. Now, one important area for language learning is culture. And it's clear that the immersion of living in another country provides many opportunities to learn culture. So in light of what I've laid out here in my research, in this research, I was interested in the cultural learning experiences of the less mobile student. So to address this issue, I considered the way that culture is taught in the local classroom. To do this, I collected 2,000 teaching materials from elementary, middle school, and high schools across Japan. I conducted a content analysis to understand how culture was taught in these materials, both explicitly as well as implicitly and unintentionally. This research resulted in 3 findings. First, there were many problems with portrayals of the nature of culture. Culture was mostly portrayed in these materials as things, or so-called big C culture, rather than unwritten norms of behavior or frames through which we interpret our world. And of course, it's these unwritten norms of behavior and interpretive frames that most often give rise to culture shock. The second finding was that culture was consistently portrayed as homogeneous within countries. There was very little portrayal of cultural diversity within particular countries, thus creating the idea that each country essentially has one culture. And finally, the third finding was that in these materials, representations of powerful groups within powerful countries predominated. So, for example, there was a lot of representation of Europe. There was a lot of representation of the English-speaking countries, such as the United States. In terms of powerful group representation, one example would be that in visual depictions of people, thousands of visual depictions, there were only 1 or 2 pictures of individuals wearing hijab. Also, Christonormativity, there was a very large representation of Christianity, very little representation of other religions, so that a student exposed to these materials would come to the conclusion, perhaps, that everyone in the United States is a Christian. So overall, what I saw was very stereotypical portrayals of culture. Now, While the teaching of culture for the less mobile student seems problematic, therefore, I think the good news about this research is that these results do indicate or suggest some changes that could be made. So, for example, obviously, more diversity being represented within countries would be very easy to implement in cultural materials. And that concludes my remarks today. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Brown, for sharing your chapter with us.